Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, this is Getting Lit with Nick. I'm Nicholas Creamer.
I'm Tobias.
And today we are discussing Watchmen, written by Alan Moore, illustrated by David Gibbons, and colorist was
John Higgins.
So Watchmen is a very iconic graphic novel, and it started as just a 12 installments from 1986, 1987, correct?
Yeah.
Just one installment a week. One installment a month. And then it was just such a good self-contained story that they compiled it into a graphic novel, and this graphic novel is actually the only winner of the Hugo Award.
Which is a really big deal in the science fiction and fantasy circuit. Like,
Definitely.
it's not really as recognized outside of that, but basically if you're a nerd, the Hugo Award is the highest thing that you can achieve. So yeah, it's an amazing thing. It's deep and complicated and like horrible and amazing.
You're very fatalist.
Yeah.
Describe Alan Moore's
It's very
work.
bleak.
Very bleak. Very defeatist.
One of the things that I really like about it is that it's straightforward enough that anyone who's not even that familiar with comics or graphic novels, or anyone who's not even that literary of a person, like I'm an English major, so like I think about books a lot. Yeah, I did write a paper about this. It's pretty good. I got an A. But so like anyone could just kind of pick this up and kind of go into it and still get a lot out of it. But if you're someone like me or someone who has spent a lot of time with comic books, there's like so many different layers that you can kind of go through and pick out little tiny things and create and analyze more meaning out of it. And so reading it through like a second or third time, or just like spending a lot of time with it and like, maybe writing a paper about it, it can really give you kind of a richer, deeper experience.
Yeah, definitely. And for those who aren't familiar with the comic book kind of lore stuff, this book starts out just as film noir murder mystery kind of thing. A well-known superhero that worked for the American government is murdered, and it starts out with that investigation, which then kicks off a more underground detective named Rorschach, kind of like your Batman kind of detective, but more connected with the underground underbelly of society, kind of looking into it, which sets off this whole conspiracy of is someone killing off masked heroes and all that. But for people who are familiar with comic books, Alan Moore's take on this is more his message is there are no real heroes in society, and he just has several commentaries on just what that would actually look like if people donned costumes and started to fight crime. How would that affect society, and how would the police force take it? Would they still be relevant? He tackles that whole thing, and he just has a whole separate thing on vigilante justice and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting because he thought it's a world, a very realistic portrayal of a world where superheroes did exist.
Yeah.
So superhero comics actually don't become a thing.
No.
It's interesting because when people think about comic books, they think about superheroes, but
Definitely.
Comic books can, and I think should, be about anything. And back in the day, they were about all kinds of different things. And so, but then, starting in the 30s and 40s and whatever, comic book superheroes became the best-selling type of comic book, so they kind of just took over. And then so Watchmen is kind of working against that. And so what it does is it portrays this world where comic books still exist, but because superheroes exist, superhero comics aren't popular. And so there's actually a tale within a tale in Watchmen that is parts of Tales of the Black Freighter is what it's called. So it's a comic book about pirates. And there's some really good parallels and symbolism between the events that are going on within the Tales of the Black Freighter.
Amazing parallels in the comic too.
And also what's happening in the actual text of Watchmen itself. I guess the other major thing to talk about is it's interesting because it's supposed to be this riff on superheroes and comic books and stuff like that, but it's there's only one character who actually has superpowers.
Yep, Dr. Manhattan.
And the rest of them are just your Batman, your Green Arrow.
Well-trained,
just well-trained or well-funded, etc.
Yep.
Sort of vigilantes. And so that also kind of provides another sort of layer on which this operates, where there's only like one character with superpowers, and that kind of sets up the 5 main people or superheroes that this book kind of explores, and like they all sort of have like their kind of different views on the world, and you're sort of asked to, as the reader, you're asked to sort of look at it and be like, which one of these guys is
like?
Yeah, or which one of these is like the
most
least
redeemable?
Yeah.
Because like
Look at these like 5 kind of horrible people.
very flawed.
Yeah.
Very flawed characters.
Owlman's like okay.
Solid.
Like, he's
Kind of a
just
sad
I don't know,
sack.
he's kind of
But
he's kind of
most
boring.
of the time, yeah.
But
very-
he's not
very
like
cutter.
he's not like a rapist or
No,
anything
not
like
rapist,
that.
He's not
A mass
like
murderer or anything like
mass
that.
murderer.
So
So
Yeah.
there's that.
Yeah.
An inhuman being made of. I don't know what is Doctor.
yeah, they it's really interesting because they very I think deliberately don't define
What
his powers and stuff
Yeah.
like that, because they just say like he has control over matter,
Over matter,
which
yeah.
is really
break down atoms.
generic. So he can kind of just do whatever they need him to do. So like he's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go live on Mars for a while. Oh, I'm just gonna like disintegrate this dude, or I'm gonna like split myself into multiple copies and like be really productive.
Yep.
Or whatever. But yeah, so we don't want to give too much away about
No.
so much of the plot, but
No.
it's like this really it starts off as kind of like noir detective thing, goes into this sort of like conspiracy
Yeah.
thing, but also it just like it focuses a lot on the characters. It's like most of the book is
Character
like
heavy.
flashbacks and stuff like
They
that.
do, yeah. Elmer does a really good. They both do a really good job just flashing back and forward and trying to explain like character development
Yeah.
without like bogging down, saying, "Oh, this is this character's motivation and this character's motivation." It really very well done.
Yeah. I also just really like the way it is very. It's like they call it a graphic novel, but it's really this like sort of multimedia thing. So because there's the main text of it, which is the kind of traditional graphic novel with the 3x3 paneling. But then at the end of every chapter, there's like some sort of like written document, and so there's like chapters of supposed to be like of a book about the people.
Former vigilante.
And then there's also the comic about the pirates, which we talked
The
about already.
Black Freighter pirate novel. Yep.
And then there's also like newspaper clippings and like.
It kind of calls back to what people were just discussing or alluding to during the actual graphic novel story, and just everything's very like deliberate in like what's included in this novel.
Yeah, there's like a part where it's like
Nothing
a
is
paper
wasted.
written by a professor.
Yep.
So yeah, so each of the 12 chapters like sort of ends with this sort of different, sort of like more sort of just based in written
Yeah.
literature, sort of this sort of thing. But it's also interesting because it's not like that is the story. That is actually a piece of writing that exists within that world. It's not like this is Alan Moore just writing an epilogue. This is a piece of writing that one of the characters wrote.
Yep.
It's really interesting.
It is. We got commentary on the heroes and that whole take, and there is quite a bit of like social.
And
like,
political commentary stuff.
Commentary and commentary on the human condition.
Yeah, 'cause Alan Moore's a little bit of a anarchist. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's really interesting just because it's because that's the thing about this, that one of the sort of the ways in which they, I think, portray what we would call a realistic world
Yeah.
with superheroes in it. There's this thing called the Keene Act passed in like the 70s, and like that's sort of like an act that's to regulate crime fighters and vigilante heroes and stuff like that. So and then so a lot of the heroes end up either going underground, or then the comedian and Dr. Manhattan end up working for the
sanctioned
government.
by the U.S. government.
Yeah, so basically there's like, 2 people that are actually sanctioned by the U.S. government, and everyone else is just either retired or breaking the law. So there's obviously a lot of like political things you can kind of read into that. Don't want to color your reading of it too much, just let you kind of explore it. Do we want to talk about favorite symmetry?
Kind of one of your favorite chapters?
Yeah,
Like,
I
chapter
wrote
6?
extensively about it in chapter 5.
Chapter 5.
So basically there's this chapter called Fearful Symmetry. It's chapter 5, and it opens and ends with the exact same set of 3 panels. That's why it's called Fearful Symmetry. But it makes reference to Rorschach's mask, because inkblot tests, the Rorschach tests, are all based in symmetry. And so it's in this chapter we get one of those sections about the Tales of the Black Freighter, and then also Adrian Vedit. Veit? Okay. Veit. Adrian Veit. So in the Tales of the Black Freighter, there's someone is killed while in the water, and then later in that chapter, Adrian Veit kills someone in a fountain, and so you're very kind of deliberately asked to like see the parallels between. This is I think one of the parts where it becomes more and more obvious. They're probably the most obvious, where it's like, this is the stuff about the pirates, and this is the stuff about the superheroes, and they're supposed to be the same thing. They never like really like hit you over the head with it like super bluntly, but it's like, this is I think one of the places where it's like becomes more obvious. And so that's and then obviously the whole thing about tying into Rorschach's mask, because Rorschach is also supposed to be this thing about symmetry. And actually I wrote this thing about the thing I closed with my paper in, where it's all of the there's several uses of like really complicated and interesting symmetry throughout the entire book, but because of that, the book itself is a Rorschach test, and by reading this and picking your favorite of the Watchmen, it is a way to psychologically analyze someone. Be like, oh, you think the comedian was the one who had it most right, then you're probably kind of like this, or like you think Dr. Manhattan's the way to go, like that probably means you're something sort of like this. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. Well, obviously then I guess we probably have to talk about the smiley face.
Smiley face, the iconic smiley face.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? I mean, is it even like worth talking about? Like people know about it?
No, people.
I mean, well, that's the thing is I feel like people know about it, but like people just think about it as like, oh, the bloodstained smiley face, but like the fact that it's going over the eye, I think, is something that's more significant than the fact that it's blood on a smiley face. Because it's not obviously blood on a smiley face juxtaposition of childhood and violence.
No,
and
not just that. But also, it's the smiley face of the pin that belonged to the comedian.
Yeah.
And there's a point of it going like straight
through
over
his eye. Yeah.
And the comedian's actually scarred down the side of his face, and
which you later find out in a flashback, he gets cut there like twice.
Yeah, I think so.
Once when he is attacking one of his like former lovers, and once because he was like drunk and angry, and once when he attempts to rape the former Spectre. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
rugged.
But yeah, also it's sort of like because like the blood is obscuring the eye, it's also this sort of like blindness and lack of sight, which is experienced by a lot of characters, because like no one really has all the answers,
Except for Dr. Manhattan. But of course, he's the omnipotent presence, so he isn't very direct about his messages. He can't really give like a direct answer.
Yeah, sometimes he has like hard time seeing the human view, because he's so busy seeing everything that he comes off as like very like cold and detached.
Alright, well, speaking of favorite chapters, my favorite chapter is the one before that, chapter 4, where we learn the history of Dr. Manhattan before he became Dr. Manhattan. And the way he does this is by sort of giving us a glimpse on like how he sees the world and pictures it, because he's a being that can see the past, the present, and the future. And so as we're getting this backstory, he's giving us different perspectives on different points in his life, and where he is presently, where he was 10 years ago, and where he thinks he'll be in the future. And this whole chapter just gives a real good glimpse on just like what sort of being like Manhattan is, sort of like almost like omnipotent being who can be in like multiple places at once, almost like sees the world, and how how something like such a being could possibly exist, and what that would even like look like or be like. And so we have his backstory and just like who he was before the incident that caused him to become Dr. Manhattan, and the aftermath of sort of like a world that that is changed and shifted and is kind of warped from his existence, because with such a being that can deconstruct matter and reconstruct it, it really helps accelerate technology and technological advancement. And some might argue, when reading this, like, he was the catalyst towards like the sort of like arms race between the US and Russia, and it sort of just created a lot more tension than it did actually like ease things and like and that sort of thing. And just this whole this entire novel, like chapter 4, like really epitomizes this like Watchmen's like multi-layered like interconnectivity, and just really shows us like just the brilliance of just that whole thing. But.
Yeah, I also think it's important to know that, like, because of this, where we're seeing so much about Dr. Manhattan, we also get a lot of the sort of like the political stuff, because like it shows him like he basically like goes into the Vietnam War and like just he just like destroys like everything, and so you can see sort of the like you get a lot of the sort of like the political commentary, but also just like some semi-realistic ideas of what the political scene would be like if America did have a superpower Dr. Manhattan type figure, you know.
Didn't winning Vietnam.
Yeah.
Like, what would that world look like? Would the Cold War be more intense, like the way it's being portrayed here, if that actually did happen?
Yeah.
It would be even closer to nuclear holocaust if that did happen.
And it's all just laid out so beautifully, because it's for him, it's because it's sort of like moving in and back and forth between all these different times in his life, but it's all actually just him on Mars reflecting, but like he is experiencing it all sort of at the same time because of his weird perspective on life, and so are we as the reader, which is I think is like this cool thing where we get aligned with Dr. Manhattan for a while. So yeah, another thing I want to talk about is sort of pragmatism and how that's sort of embodied through Adrian.
Yeah.
I think that it makes him a really compelling character just because it makes that's sort of like his shtick, kind of, because each character kind of has their own shtick. Because they're all supposed to be kind of like, you know,
very brilliant, very idealistic.
Yeah.
Like, has like a vision towards like saving the world and like using their powers just for like a greater good on a grander scale rather than like just cleaning out this like particular slums.
Or worrying about like the Cold War and stuff like that. So I think he's really interesting, but he's also he's kind of terrifying in that way, where it's like he's willing to like put he's willing to let 1,000 people die, so 10,000 people live or whatever or anything like that. It's interesting to see something that kind of like boiled down to like such like a ruthless and like arithmetic. It's kind of unsettling, but it's interesting though, because it's he's one of those characters where it's like you can see the good and the bad in him, which I think makes for a really compelling character, and like, I think compelling villains in general, like, or it's like something like Ra's al Ghul, where it's like you understand, or like, so every now and then I wake up and I like oh, I know, I get why Ra's al Ghul does what he does, and that's what makes him interesting. And sometimes I even agree with Ra's al Ghul, and I have to like stop and think and be like, wait a minute, maybe it's like and it's I think it's just a testament to like a good character and a good writing of a character. Because I think, in real life it's rarely that simple, where it's just good guys and bad guys. It's like, some yin and some yang.
Some sort of mentality.
So, and it's really, I think he's just a really well written character. I think all the characters are really interesting, and it's just good. So go read it.
Go read it, guys. God dang.
The movie apparently is pretty good. I haven't seen it yet.
It is solid. I mean, like, Watchmen really gives me faith in Zack Snyder for Batman vs Superman.
Right.
In terms of like faithfulness to the source material, he nailed the aesthetic in Watchmen, and most of the narrative is still intact. Mm-hmm. Maybe some of the extra stuff isn't, but he really did a good job with the movie. So first read the book, or you can watch the movie first. I'm not really pro book or pro movie. Those kind of people.
Yeah, I've adopted the practice where I watch the movie first, and then I read the book. Because then, usually what happens is, you're not as disappointed, because some people are like, oh no, the Harry Potter movie is not as good as the book. Like, I don't know, I also, especially after the Hobbit movies came out, like, I'm willing to just appreciate everything for what it is.
Sure.
And even though it is something that's, like, called The Hobbit, which is one of my favorite things from my childhood, I'm still like, this is, 9 hours of, or, 8 hours maybe, of just, like, nonsense
Spectacle.
and spectacle. Even though I'll stand by the first Hobbit movie, for that guy.
So,
I was into that. Anyway, that was
So,
a bit of a tangent, we might cut that out.
so yeah.
Thanks for watching.
And this has been Getting Lit with Nick, featuring Watchmen.